So, welcome to the Kickass Midlife Method podcast. I'm your host, Rachael Woolston, and I'm joined by some of the women from the Kickass Midlife Method community. So, today's learning is on understanding your workout, your power workout zone in menopause, which will help you unlock the key to improve strength and your body fat loss and feeling kick-ass. So, the reason I'm particularly doing this on zones at the moment is there is lots going on, or there's lots in the media at the moment around zone 2, everybody talking about zone 2 and how beneficial it can be for your training. It's like, suddenly everyone's going on about it as the key to body fat loss, the key to optimizing longevity, all of that kind of stuff. But first, let's kind of dig down into what zones are. What are we even talking about? So if you're a runner and you've been training for quite a long time, then it's likely that you will come across zones anyway, because zones have actually been around for years and years. It's just suddenly this zone 2 things come up. So the whole purpose of creating zones, and another way of looking at zones is for anyone who's doing any of the Kickass Midlife Method stuff, it's also your perceived rate of exertion that you get at the end of the workout, 1 to 10. But zones are created particularly coming from endurance sport like marathon running and a triathlon, normally 1 to 5. And the purpose of creating specific zones is to help people work within different zones to get different physiological and metabolic adaptations through their training. So some zones are better at developing endurance, others at speed and power, and it's all related to your heart rate, to your effort level, that kind of things. So for instance, zone 2 is generally considered the zone in which you work to improve endurance. So a lot of marathon training, kind of 80% will be at zone 2, the other 20% will be at hard efforts. So just explaining this a little bit more. So zone 2 is defined around 60 to 75% of your FTP, which stands for functional threshold power, which is related to cycling, or 70 to 85% of your heart rate. But much more simply, so you can go around, maybe put a 2 in the chat box if you ever use heart rate training. So some people use heart rate training as a way of judging whether they're working hard enough and or easy enough, because you have to be able to work in those different zones, and heart rate is a really reliable way of doing that. So lots of people, for instance, will wear like a Garmin will tell you your heart rate zone. So some people might work within that. Let's see if anyone does. Gemma works in heart rate zone sometimes. But a best way, when I coach people, I generally coach people, including my running clients, I usually go on perceived rate of exertion. So it's easier for you to, if you haven't got the tech, and also if you don't want to be relying on tech all the time, looking down at your watch, then it's really good to just do it by effort level. So you'll get that at the end of all your workouts on the Kickass Midlife Method. Like, it will ask you on that little wheel to say, what rate of effort did you put in? And that's my way of of checking how hard you're working, if you're working at the rate that you should be. And a zone 2 is a measure of you can talk quite easily. As soon as you get past that effort where you'll run short of breaths, then you're out of zone 2. So that's kind of, if you're thinking about what zone 2 feels like, that's a really good indication of what zone 2 feels like. So yeah, what's the fuss about? So the reason zone 2 has suddenly become everywhere. Has anybody listening, has any of you maybe tell me in the chat whether any of you have read anything about zone 2 suddenly being everywhere and everyone going on about it? The idea for this podcast, this particular presentation, actually came from one of the women on the Kickass Midlife Method community, who has come across it, suddenly started seeing it everywhere. Yeah, Brenda, you have sometimes. The reason it suddenly become so big is there was a Tour de France rider who his coach was going on about zone 2 and all these amazing adaptations he's made. And then suddenly it became everywhere in the media. But the reason, like in terms of the fitness community and more recreational training has suddenly latched onto zone 2 is because zone 2 is considered that area where your body is able to burn fat as fuel. There are two different fuels that you burn when you're exercising. There are the carbohydrates, which are the glucose that's in your blood, and then there's your body fat stores. So, and there's also this kind of theory that you're able to clear lactate more easily at higher intensity exercise so that you can go for longer if you train this zone 2 in the zone 2 area to create those adaptations. So that's where this is all coming from, particularly for women. Of course, all the women's magazines have gone, right, let's talk about zone 2 because it means that's what women want to do because they want to burn body fat. But it's more complicated than that. Because does it really work when it comes to women, and specifically women in menopause? So, as usual, a lot of the studies and a lot of the research is done on men, and a lot of the research and that physiological adaptations are around men's performance, not women's. So, as I say, the original idea of it came from the coach for one of the Tour de France riders. And our bodies are already well adapted to using body fat as fuel. And we have the two muscle types, slow twitch type 1 and fast twitch type 2. So you're genetically born with more of one type than the other, both just individually, but as a gender specific, in terms of gender specific, in terms of men versus women, let me put it that way, women generally have more type 1, so slow twitch muscles, making us better at endurance than men who have lots of fast twitch type 2, better at fast speed work and power work. But then it means that our bodies are already pretty well adapted to using fat as fuel, and we're already pretty well adapted to clearing lactate. So therefore, all the research is not really for us. And yes, whilst zone 2 does burn fat as fuel, and it does, if you train in that zone 2, then your body becomes more well adapted to switching quickly between using body fat, optimizing body fat as fuel and carbohydrates. In reality, finding the time to do it is a completely different thing. And it's also more than just about science. So in menopause, what is happening to our bodies physiologically is we are losing muscle. So actually, one of the key things we need to do with our exercise is create muscle. Without muscle, our metabolism slows down. So we're already, meaning we're burning less as we're sitting down, not moving around very much. We haven't got as much muscle. So therefore, because muscle is a metabolic tissue, therefore it needs calories just to exist. Less muscle means we're already metabolism slowing down, and that means probably more fat gain. So you need zone 4 effort level 7 out of 8 strength work or plyometrics, so jumping or sprint work to create the muscle. You don't get that from zone 2. So zone 4, 7 to 8 effort level is actually where you want to sit with 3 to 4 workouts a week in order to create the gains that you are most wanting to see and feel. And also the other thing is we exercise to generate endorphins. All the workouts I try to create on Kickass Midlife Method are all about trying to create ones that create that feeling of, even if it's difficult at the time, you feel really amazing and empowered at the end of it. Now, it's far easier to remain consistent to doing that exercise because it makes you feel something, it makes you feel good, than a type 2, which is long. You start thinking, God, when is this going to finish? And therefore, you're less likely to do it, unless you're someone training for a marathon and you have to do it for a goal set reason. So it's more about far more than science. It's about, the whole holistic approach to exercise and why we do it, as well as that physiological thing. Women in menopause, we want muscle, which you don't create through zone 2 exercise. And also, as I was saying before, to create, to get into that optimizing your, to get into that zone 2 of burning body fat as fuel, you actually need to do 90 minutes to get through the glucose that's already in your body before you switch over to burning body fat. So if you think about it, I know lots of people on the Kickass Midlife Method have struggled with time to fit in exercise, which is why all the workouts are 15 to 30 minutes. You're suddenly thinking, oh, I'm just going to do zone 2 just for the purpose of these adaptations. 90 minutes and over. Do you have the time for that? Not likely, certainly not consistently to make that an effect, really. But zone 2 is good. The reason there are so many zones, zone 1 to 5, and we have that RPE of 1 to 10, is that it is good to work in different zones at different times. So what zone 2 is good for is that recovery zone. So some workouts in your week should be at that recovery zone. So say if you're training for running, half marathon, 10K, marathon, anything like triathlon, whatever it is, if you've got a good coach or you're following a good plan, there should be quite a lot of that is zone 2 in order for you to recover from the hard adaptation, the hard workouts, which will help that adaptation. So within the Kickass method, you'll have things like walking or yoga or myofascial release, and they're kind of your zone 2, or sometimes your mobility workouts, which are not, 8 out of 10 effort. Just give me a 5 in the chat if you're still listening. If you're still listening, not heard of it. Thank you. Good. And so for the most effective, to kind of recap, for the most effective workout in terms of your physiological results in menopause, perimenopause, and aesthetics. So let's think about it. We do want to look good as well. So it is about aesthetics. It is about what you look like, but it's also about, in terms of your physiological results, building muscle. Then research shows a minimum of 3 days a week of HIIT, which is high intensity interval training, or SIT, sprint interval training, will dramatically increase your results. And that's studies pulled together by Dr. Stacey Sims. So I don't know whether some of you have heard of her, but she's specifically works and writes within the field of women's fitness and sport, and particularly around perimenopause or menopause. So she's got a book out called Raw, and another one as well, actually, which might be of interest for some of you to read. It is, I think, a little bit too heavy on the science for most people because she's a scientist, but she's really good at pulling out research around, actually specifically around women's stuff. Talking specifically, bringing it back to your experience within the program, for instance, and how you can then use the zones, because zone 1 to 5 tends to be something that I would use more for runners, but your rate of perceived exertion is the kind of gold standard that you should be using within your workouts to figure out how hard am I working, and is it hard enough? So for instance, sometimes I'll see in people's dials that they are working at 6 out of 10 effort. And I'm talking about specifically the strength workouts here. I'm not talking about the yoga stuff that's there or the runs or anything like that. I'm talking specifically about those HIIT style strength workouts that are programmed within it. And there'll be a 6 out of 10. So what's going on there is either that you're working with a weight that's too light for you, or your rest period is too long. So there are various ways of, like, say you haven't got another weight, so you can't afford to buy another higher weight. What you would do, you could talk to me, you talk about looking at decreasing your interval, your rest interval, or increasing the specific exercise that you're doing, increasing the duration that you're doing that for, to get to that 8 out of 10 effort level. So another way, though, if you're just new to exercising, is learning where you are in that perceived rate of exertion, 1 to 10, takes some time. So at the beginning, you might think, I can't go to 8 out of 10. It's too unpleasant. I don't want to go. I don't want to go to the 8 out of 10. I'm going to sit at 6. And that's okay for you to get used to, but you want to be able to learn to challenge yourself to push into that 8 out of 10, because that is where you'll get the change. If you don't do that, you're not really going to get the change that you want to see. And then that 8 out of 10, it's not that you get to 8 out of 10 and then you get fitter and then you never get to 8 out of 10 anymore. You always need to be working those 3 to 4 sessions a week, need to be at 8 out of 10 effort for you to see and feel the results, both in terms of your health and fitness and how you look. So of those people who are listening in, what level do you feel that you work at with your perceived rate of exertion on the whole at the moment? Like maybe so far this week, what have you been working on? 1 to 10, 4, 8, 7, 9. Anyone else want to share? 7. Yeah, and that kind of, I agree, the 6 to 7. Yeah. So this is something for you to think about when you go back to the workouts, is how can you make that an 8? Because the more you work into that 8 during the workouts, you're not going to be like, I'm loving this. So it's also a little bit about your mental resilience within that workout, of keeping on pushing, keeping yourself accountable to that perceived rate of exertion so that you get the results. Ali, yeah, thank you. I'll let you know tomorrow. So keep trying to challenge yourself in those workouts. Keep kind of pushing your limits to see where that 8 out of 10 effort is. So a 10, a good way of you judging what a 10 is. A 10 would be a flat out, burning lungs, short sprint that you'd probably be able to last for like 30 meters. Your complete max is a 10. Your 8 obviously is not complete max, but you should be working at that rate where you are probably able to say a few words. If you're in a class with someone, you could say a few words to someone, and your heart rate would be really high. You would be really sweating, and you're going to really feel that power. For instance, if you're lifting a barbell at an 8 out of 10 effort, you're likely to be out of breath. So often people don't think of weights as something that works you aerobically, but 8 out of 10, 8 out of 10, when you're lifting a barbell heavy enough, it will make you breathe really heavily and sweat. So Gemma's just said, I used to get there when I did spin 3 times a week. So that's really interesting. So obviously in your aerobic cardio type of exercise, with a bit of push of being in a group environment, you're able to get out of 8 out of 10. So if you know what 8 out of 10 feels like in your spin, then you want to recreate that within your workouts. So has anyone got any questions around that or around anything else related to their program? No. So yeah, so go back when you go back. I have done a kind of a presentation on perceived rate of exertion in the past, but this goes a little bit more into why zone 2 has suddenly become really popular. And as I say, don't start going into thinking, oh, I'm just going to try and do long, slow stuff, because you've got to go and do long, very long stuff all the time. And you don't have the time, and it's a bit boring. And it can, if you're not fueling properly, what can happen is you can burn your muscle as well, and that's not what you want to do. So you want to be working, you're thinking about, in menopause, you're thinking about workouts to create muscle, and that comes from your HIIT, which you're getting in the program, or your sit, your sprint interval training. It doesn't have to be weight. So sometimes you'll have a workout in the program, which is plyometrics. So plyometrics create that same kind of force activation off the floor that you do. So a jump, skipping, that kind of thing, box jumps. They are similar things. Burpees, for some of you who've done your fitness tests, they are your similar physiological effect as lifting weights at a high intensity interval effort, that kind of thing. So going forward, start thinking about your 8 out of 10s in those 3 sessions a week. And if you are struggling, not reaching it, and you can't afford the next weight, or you don't want to start buying lots and lots of weights, message me within the app, and we'll talk about the ways to get you an 8 out of 10 without necessarily having to buy another weight. Great. So thanks for joining. I hope this was useful and you learned something from it. And hopefully, just one more question. Yeah, if I'm doing 2 weightlifting each week, can I drop a weight session in the program? Yes. If you're doing 2 weightliftings, then you just would tick off any session that's in your program, and you've done a weight session in there anyway, just tick it off as completed. You don't have to do 2 plus whatever's in your workout plan, because the weightlifting session will work. Brilliant. Thanks for joining. I hope that was useful, and I'll see you on the next one.